Welcome folks, I am Jaby Koay and I'm doing this from my office because Achara Kirk commandeered my living room to do some long-form reactions. I thought this would be a nice change of scene anyway, having the Spider-Man No Way Home trailers playing in the background on repeat. Hopefully it's not distracting. Anyway, I wanted to talk to you guys about changes that were made to Spider-Man No Way Home after it was already put out there in movie theaters. And I also wanted to ask you guys how you feel about changes to media in general after it's already been put out there for public consumption. Me personally, I grew up on physical media. I grew up on VHS tapes, DVDs, the first iteration of Blu-rays, physical media, video games, all that stuff. And now we're in the age of streaming and digital downloads, and changes can be made anytime. I never really thought about the fact that movies are put out in theaters digitally now, because it used to be that films were sent to theaters in big film canisters. So it was too costly and impractical to make changes to films after it already went out in theaters. Now, with everything being streamed to theaters and put on hard drives or shipped on hard drives, it's a lot easier to make these changes than it ever was before. Back in the late 90s, George Lucas put out an updated version of Star Wars, the original trilogy, and he called it the special edition versions. What people didn't realize at the time was that there was no walking back on these special edition versions, and that those were the definitive versions going forward. For purists, this was abhorrent and terrible. And today, you can't buy the original versions that were shown in theaters before 1997. Today, you can only buy the special edition versions of those movies. And it's very frustrating for those individuals because the only way to get them is to go on eBay and buy like a very primitive old version on VHS or DVD or Laserdisc of the original trilogy. Otherwise, you won't be able to watch them. There are people out there who are trying to put together high-res versions of the original trilogy, but who knows when that'll be made for public consumption. Now, the changes that were made for Spider-Man No Way Home, I'm about to go into them, but I want to let you know in advance that there are spoilers in these changes, so if you haven't watched Spider-Man No Way Home yet, don't watch this video until you've seen that movie. There is a link in the description below for the article that I read that shows you videos side-by-side differences between what was before and what is now. I'm not comfortable showing you those video clips. I will show you stills for side-by-side comparison. So the first change I'll talk about is the portal when Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire show up for the first time in the movie. The original version of these portals had more of a smoky look to it, a smoky texture, and it was updated to look more like the traditional Doctor Strange portals that we're used to seeing. Minor change, not a big deal. The film is essentially the same. And the film is essentially the same for the other change I'm about to talk about, but it is more aggressive. The scene where Green Goblin is by the dumpster and he's like shifting around with his stuff trying to hide it, the shots are slightly different now, and the edits are slightly different from what it was before. It's very strange to me that the version of No Way Home playing in theaters right now is probably different from the version you saw in theaters or the version I saw. Does this thought make you guys at all uncomfortable? Are you totally fine with it? I mean, the overall experience of the movie is essentially the same, and it's probably just closer to what the filmmaker intended, but it is odd that, kind of like video games, you can do patches on movies now and just update it later on. I don't personally like that. I'd like it to be that whatever is out there in theaters is the final form, and that's it. But now we're in an age that I would call the George Lucas age, where things can be changed anytime. For some reason, it makes me uncomfortable, and that's the main reason I'm making this video, because I want to know how many of you guys it makes uncomfortable. Back in 2009, Amazon got in hot water because they went into everybody's Kindles and took out the book 1984. Now, the reason that they did this actually makes a lot of sense. It's still unsettling, but I understand it. So whoever put out 1984 on the Amazon storefront didn't actually have the rights to that book. So Amazon did a correction and went into everyone's Kindles and took the book out. Obviously, this led to backlash and people felt very uncomfortable with this, but it did highlight the fact that you don't actually own anything in the digital era. If you download something or stream something, there is no ownership over it. Whereas if you buy a DVD, a physical book, a Blu-ray, a video game, if you buy physical media, whether it's a movie or a book or a game, you essentially have a version that is unchangeable. Obviously, with video games, patches can be done, updates can be made, but for the most part, what you have isn't going to change. Whereas, if you're streaming a movie, if you're watching it in theaters now, if you're doing a digital download, changes can be made anytime. Now, a more recent example of this is Grand Theft Auto 3. With Rockstar putting out updated versions of the games, one of those updates is they don't have the licensing to 20 songs now. And the only way to play the version of the game that offers those 20 songs is if you had the game on PlayStation 2 or some kind of physical version of the game, maybe on PC. But if you're downloading it right now, I think I might be wrong, but if you're downloading an updated version of the game, you don't have access to those songs anymore. These kinds of changes are happening all the time with games that you download or stream. Another example that's more innocuous and actually I'm okay with is an update to Elliot Page's name on Umbrella Academy. That's a show that is streamed on Netflix, and it formerly said Ellen Page, but after Ellen Page became Elliot Page, they updated the show to represent who he is now. However, if I were to buy Juno on Blu-ray or DVD, and that right there is the big difference between physical media and streaming or digital media. So if you're a purist, there's no way to have the original version of whatever you saw, whether you saw it in theaters, whether you streamed it, whether you did a digital download. If the publisher, the company, whoever wants to make a change to these items, you don't have any say-so over the matter. You have agreed to allow them to reach into your device and make changes anytime, or make changes on their library that you're streaming from anytime, and there's nothing you can do about it. I would imagine that younger people watching this video don't give a shit and you're okay with it and you're used to changes happening all the time. It's like whatever. But for someone like myself who grew up on VHS tapes, DVDs, the first iteration of Blu-rays, that is unsettling and I don't necessarily like it. I understand it, but I don't necessarily like it. Spielberg quoted some famous filmmaker a long time ago saying that films are never completed, they're abandoned. And at some point you gotta abandon the work. It's like, it's out there now. That is the version that's out there. Don't George Lucas this thing. It's just out there now. Now, if you read up on Spider-Man No Way Home, so many things seem to be happening really late. Like Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire didn't actually sign on to the film until December of 2020. The film came out in December 2021. That turnaround is crazy, which says to me that it was a rush to get it ready for public consumption by December 2021, which makes sense as to why they're doing updates after it's already out in theaters. I get it. I totally understand why they are doing these changes. It's necessary, but it still doesn't sit super well with me, and I guess I just want to know from you guys if it doesn't sit well with you either. This might be what it is going forward though. It might be that just like with video games where you get patches, updates, movies are going to have the same thing where after it hits theaters, after it hits your TV, there'll be patches and updates to make the visual effects more complete, better rendered. And in some ways I'm okay with that, in other ways I'm not. There are older films that I would like to see updated visual effects to, and I hope they reach into my system and just update it, or just update it on the streaming library. One of my favorite video games of all time, Infamous 2, I wish they would give me an updated version that I could just play right now, but they don't have it. The only version I can play is the old version. Anyway, that's not the point. The point is, there are pros and cons to this, but do the pros outweigh the cons? And I leave that to you guys. Do let me know your feelings in the comments below. I am so curious who else feels the way I do, confused, unsure. Maybe it's okay. So that's it for now. Thanks for hanging out. Subscribe if you haven't already, hit that bell icon, all notifications, and vote this up to let YouTube know you enjoyed what you watched. I'm Jaby Koay. Peace out.